Well, hello and welcome to another video by Financial Learning. On today's video, we're going to be talking about CleanSpark Inc.'s latest press release as of December 12th, 2024, and it has to do with a proposal for a private offering of convertible notes for up to $550 million. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, and before we get into today's press release, if you are wondering at all what a senior convertible note is, specifically what a zero interest senior convertible note is all about, I will be discussing that at the end of this video, but let's get right into this press release. All right, so CleanSpark did announce during after hours through press release on December 12th, the intent to offer in principle $550 million of a convertible senior note which will be due on 2030. This specific offering will be a private offering that will be in place for specific private institutional buyers. CleanSpark also intends to grant the purchaser of these convertible notes with an option of within 13 days of the initial placement of the convertible note for an additional $100 million in the form of additional convertible notes. So a couple of things that they will be using this money for. The first thing is to purchase some capped calls. This is an excellent way that companies try to hedge their bets against any form of additional dilution for the shareholders. What this means is in the event that the share price does continue to increase, the company will have specific call options set in place, capped at a specific amount of money per share, so that they are able to generate additional income that they are able to pay these specific owners of these convertible notes without having to exercise additional shares to make up the balance. Now, a couple things that we still do not know based on this press release is what the conversion rate will be for these shares, but we do have a couple other specific factors. Before we get into that, let's continue talking about what exactly the rest of these funds are going to be used for. The next thing is going to be $125 million that they plan to use to repurchase shares from these specific lenders. So you may be asking yourself, what's the point of giving them these notes and then repurchasing them back? Well, remember, these are not due until 2030. So this does allow CleanSpark to use these funds for the next few years to invest back into the company, again, to maybe generate additional revenue, scale up their miners, their fleet, as well as some other acquisitions. They talk about all of that. But if you think about it, they're able to use the money now, and then at a later date, they're going to then repurchase these shares that they would be giving back to the investor. So again, it's a great way to be able to leverage that money now and then pay it back later. That's the whole point. And the last thing that they do plan to use this money for is to pay off debt. So they do have a current debt with Coinbase, one of the lenders, and they're going to use this specific convertible note to pay this off. So again, they're going to be knocking out the principal of the remaining loan and not have to worry about that interest rate. All right, a couple of very key things to note as well in this next paragraph here. You can see here that this specific secured senior convertible note will not bear any regular interest rate. So it is going to be a zero interest rate convertible loan. So what this most likely means is that there will be a certain discount that these investors will receive up front. So for instance, in the event that it's $550 million, they potentially will be offering CleanSpark maybe $500 million. Again, I am just speculating here because we don't have these specific terms, but they're going to basically provide CleanSpark with a discounted amount, and that difference they will be receiving whenever this specific note matures, which in this case is 2030. The next thing to note specifically is that this will not accrete. If you want to look up that terminology, basically it means that the principal amount will not grow over time either. So there were a few things that if you are familiar at all with the way that a lot of these convertible notes work, one thing would be that they are interest bearing. So the investor is making money year over year until the note matures. The other way is potentially with a zero interest loan. However, each year that principal does grow a fixed amount. So neither of these two things are true for CleanSpark. It is a regular interest, zero interest loan with no concern of that principal growing year over year. And as I mentioned, they have not announced what that conversion rate is. According to the press release, they are still in negotiations with the investor who is looking to actually purchase this $550 million worth of convertible senior notes. And the reason why they call it senior is in the event that there is ever any kind of bankruptcy for any company, investors that own a senior secured note will actually have preference over just a standard note holder or an investor. These capped call transactions, again, this helps the company hedge their bets in case the price of the stock continues to rise at the time of the maturity date or at whatever exercise price is set up in the final negotiated contract. The company would either have to provide the shares at that specific price, which means potentially dilution to give them the amount of shares that would equate to that price amount, or they may decide to exercise cash. Either way, it would be at an increase if the share price does go up. So when a company chooses to exercise capped calls, again, this is a great way that they're able to kind of hedge that bet, and it's capped because it will be utilized, it'll be able to be exercised up to a specific amount of money, and at that specific capped price, then that's when the additional shares or the additional money would be owed to the investor. But a lot of times the capped amount is at a rather significant increase to the current share price. All right, and as I mentioned, I did want to touch base on a couple of these senior secured convertible notes, some of the definitions behind them, as well as some pros on why companies would want to take place in these types of transactions. So first thing, of course, is the principal amount. We already talked about that in the case of CleanSpark. That's at $550 million, and they do have an option for this investor to go ahead and purchase an additional $100 million worth of these senior secured notes or senior convertible notes within 13 days of the initial transaction. Next thing is interest rate. As we spoke about, there is a 0 regular interest rate for this specific convertible note that CleanSpark is offering. Next thing is maturity date. We already spoke about that. That is set up for 2030. And conversion price. That is what we still do not know. According to the press release, they are still in negotiations with the institutional buyer or the investor looking at this specific senior convertible note. Last thing is going to be a conversion ratio. Again, we do not have this specific information, so the conversion price as well as the conversion ratio is still to be determined. So with those two pieces of information, whoever is still sitting on the sideline waiting to see how exactly how much of a bullish thing this may be is probably waiting for that conversion price as well as that conversion ratio. And a couple reasons why companies do take place in these senior convertible notes. First thing is flexible financing. So again, they're able to usually get a lower or no interest rate type of loan for them to be able to put back into capital investments or different things such as was mentioned here, ways to repurchase some of these shares at a later date. Another thing it does is it avoids immediate dilution. So anytime a company does exercise at the market offerings, that is going to be an immediate dilutive effect to the current shareholders. So a lot of times these senior secured notes that have a maturity date a few years out, that gives the company an opportunity to grow that capital and then pay for it either in the form of shares with dilution or potentially back with the initial capital. So it really depends on the company's finances at the point of maturity. Next thing is going to be some tax benefits. So again, if we're talking about specific interest payments, a lot of times the companies can deduct those. In the case of CleanSpark, there's going to be 0 interest. So this really doesn't impact their specific contract that they're still negotiating. And another reason why investors would want to take part in these specific types of senior secured notes, again, it gives them the opportunity to invest in a company without having as much of a risk of a downside on the price action. Because remember, they are going to be guaranteed the specific price of the stock with that conversion rate at that maturity date. So again, it just benefits the investor if the share price continues to go up. But in the event it doesn't, the company is still going to have to pay them that same amount of money back in the form of either shares or that capital. All right, and you may have seen in some other press releases, companies such as MicroStrategy, Mara, and TeraWulf have been utilizing either convertible bonds or senior convertible notes to be able to generate some additional capital. Some of these companies are utilizing their Bitcoin HODL. Other companies are utilizing their specific shares in the form of equity financing. Either way, I believe that the way CleanSpark is doing this is very smart. They are leveraging their equity, but they're doing this at a much later date. At the time that this specific senior secured note will mature, we will have already taken place in an additional halving. Typically after halving, the price of Bitcoin continues to rise because of the supply and demand as the amount of remaining Bitcoin is halved at that time. So it does make it more and more difficult to be able to mine or collect that additional Bitcoin, which does make the price continue to rise. So I do believe that the maturity date that they have negotiated, as well as the fact that it's zero interest, these are all very good signs. And what the company is planning to do with this capital, again, I do believe that at least in the short to midterm, it is going to be able to benefit the investors that are currently invested in CleanSpark. And then depending on how they leverage this capital in the short to medium term, by the time that the capital does mature, the company will then be able to either pay it back via cash or be able to pay it back via company shares. All right, and with all that being said, I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Drop a comment, let me know your thoughts about this video. Do you think that this was bullish or bearish for CleanSpark to be able to submit this specific senior convertible note at the price, the maturity date, and the interest rate, which we know is zero? Go ahead and let me know. And with all that said, hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you on the next one.